Okay, well, hello everyone. Good to see so many people right now watching us. My name is Elizabeth, and we have Zia here as well. We are lawyers at LM Law Group. Most of you will already know that. Many of you are probably our clients as well. But we wanted to today go through a webinar about the new OINP, the new Provincial Nominee Program for Ontario, specifically on the Workforce Priority stream, which is the new employer-based stream that is likely going to start any day now. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the slides and go over the program with you. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we have at the end. All right? Okay, so here we go. All right, so what has happened to the OINP? Well, the OINP has undergone a complete overhaul. All of the previous programs in the program have now been canceled. Okay. Now, if you have already been invited to apply through one of those old programs, don't worry, your application is still going to be assessed under the old criteria. But if you have not been invited to apply, your profile would have been canceled, and we will, if you're our client or you can yourself, we would be putting your new profile in once the program opens. All right. So there's going to be a few stages. There's going to be a few new programs that the government is coming out with. Stage one, this is the program that we are going to concentrate on telling you guys all about it today. Okay, and that's the Ontario Workforce Priority Stream. It's going to be opening in the next few days. We don't know exactly when, but all of the rules have now been announced. Okay. Now, there will be more programs later on this fall and perhaps next year, who knows? The government has announced some details. They're not finalized yet. We'll give you a taste at the end of what we know that these programs are going to be. All right? But let's first go on and talk about this new employer-based program. We're going to call it the WPS, Workforce Priority Stream.
Perfect. So when we're talking about the workforce priority stream, essentially these are replacing all of the employer job offer streams from the previous OINP system. And so with the workforce priority stream, you have requirements on the employer, so the employer that's supporting your application, the position that you're using for your OINP application, and on you as the applicant. So three sets of requirements that you want to keep in mind: the employer, the position, and you as an applicant. So let's first look at the employer requirement. So what does the employer need to meet in order to be eligible to support your application through the OINP program? Now, these largely do seem similar to the previous OINP program, but there are some very notable and very important differences. So first of all, in terms of employers, they do have to have been in active business for the past 3 years. They have to have been in active business for at least 3 years. And that applies to all employers that are applying through the OINP program. Now, there's also requirements for the employer in terms of the number of employees and on their gross income. But for both of these, the specific amounts that they have to meet depend on the location of your job offer. So if you are working in the GTA, then the company needs to have at least 5 full-time employees that are either Canadian citizens or permanent residents, and they need to have grossed at least $1 million in their most recent fiscal year. Those numbers change when we start looking at other regions. So now OINP has broken, before it used to just be GTA and non-GTA. Now they've broken it up into three different categories. So we have GTA, which stays the same as it was before. OINP has outlined a second category of municipalities that are eligible that qualify, and those include what you see on the slide here. So Ottawa, Waterloo, Hamilton. For these particular list of regions, the gross income decreases to 500,000 in the most recent fiscal year, and the number of full-time employees decreases also to three. Those employees have to be either permanent residents or Canadian citizens, and they do have to be full-time employees. Any other location other than the GTA and the listed ones that you see in the second box, the revenue requirements go down even further to 250,000, but it's over the past two fiscal years. So they need to have grossed at least the 250 in each of the in the two most recent fiscal years. And again, here for these communities, they do have to have at least three full-time employees that are, again, Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Okay, so those are the requirements in terms of the business so that they're able to support an application through the OINP program. Then, like I mentioned earlier, we look at the requirements for the position itself, for the job that you're using. The job has to be a full-time role, and it also has to be a permanent position. So this means that you need to be working, the job offer needs to be at least 30 hours a week, and it has no end date, right? So it's an indeterminate contract that you're holding. There are also wage requirements for the position. Now, this is based on the knock and on the location of your employment. And so when you're looking at the wage requirements, if you for generally the wage requirement is that you have to meet the median wage levels. Now there are certain exceptions. The one is if you are a recent Ontario graduate, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment. But if you are a recent Ontario graduate holding a high skilled job offer, so it falls under tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, then you can meet the entry level wage requirement, so the low wage requirement. So generally, you're looking at needing to meet the median wage. However, if you are a recent Ontario graduate with a job offer in a high skilled position, then that wage requirement decreases to the entry level wage. Now, really important distinction here is the definition of the Ontario graduate. So OINP has actually changed this now to saying that you need to have graduated from an eligible Ontario institution within the past 3 years, okay, from the date of your application. So not from the date when you're going into the pool, but from the time that when you get your ITA and you actually submit the OINP application, you have to go back and have graduated within those past 3 years. This is really important because previously we saw that OINP was only considering an international graduate as one that had graduated within the past 2 years. So they've increased that to the last 3 years. In terms of programs, you've had to have graduated either from a 2-year degree or diploma program or master's, PhD, or a 1-year college postgraduate certificate program. So those are the eligible programs. Ontario has a list of eligible institutions, and you have to have completed that program within the last 3 years. With the wage requirements, it also does need to meet, if you're already working in that position with the employer, at minimum, they do have to provide you with the current salary that you're already receiving as part of the job offer for the OINP program. And then lastly, if you're already working for the employer, then there is no recruitment requirement for the OINP program. If this is a position that you're not already working for in Ontario with the employer, and the employer has not already received an LMIA for that role, then they will have to show recruitment and that they meet the recruitment requirements in order to be able to move forward with the OINP application.
Okay, so we've talked about the employer requirements, talked about the job requirements. So now we look at whether or not you, if you're the applicant, can qualify to enter the pool. Okay, so let's first talk about work experience. So it depends on whether or not the job offer falls within the tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. That's going to be the high skilled. Tier 4 and 5 are low skilled. Okay. So for the high skilled, for the most part, there's basically four ways that you can qualify. If you have worked in your position, the same position for 6 months, of and it has to be the same position that you are getting offered to, okay, with the same employer. 6 months continuously in the last 12 months, you can qualify. Otherwise, if you are an Ontario graduate, see, I just went through what an Ontario graduate is. So if you're an Ontario graduate and you submit your application within 3 years of your graduation, and you have 3 months of continuous work experience in the last 12 months, then you can qualify. So, for example, if you were doing a co-op work position with the employer, and later on you get to be hired back for the same position, okay, even if the 3 months wasn't just at the time that you were working, maybe it was a few months ago, but it was within the last year, you could qualify for this. Okay. Now, if you have not been working with the same employer for this amount of time, if you have 2 out of 5 years of work experience in the same knock, there are some exceptions for technologists, technicians, and engineer, pharmacy, and nurses aid. Like if you were an engineer before and you became a tech, or pharmacist before and you're a pharmacy assistant, nurses aid, etc. You can do different knocks for a little bit of the different knocks, but for the most part, it's the same knock, 2 out of 5 years. That could be anywhere in the world. It does not have to be with that same employer, okay? And doesn't even have to be in Canada. That's basically the same criteria as the previous program, 2 out of 5 years, okay? Or if your profession, if what you do requires a mandatory license, and you hold that license. In that case, you don't actually have to have any work experience. You could now qualify. Now, there is a caveat, okay? For transport truck drivers and transit operators, bus operators, all those two knock codes, you still need to meet the 6 month rule before you can qualify. Now, moving on to the low skilled, that one is much simpler. It's 9 months of work experience in the position in the last 2 years. 9 months of work experience in that position with that same employer in the last 2 years. Okay, moving on to education. For the education for high skilled, for the most part, they will want to see a 1 year post-secondary program. It could be anywhere in the world, but 1 year, okay? Post-secondary program that you have finished, okay? Now, there are exceptions. So, if you are on one of the listed skilled trades categories, high school is the requirement. If you are a nurse's aide, you need the 1 year Ontario graduate certificate. And if you hold a mandatory license in the occupation, the license is mandatory for your occupation, you don't actually need the education program. Okay. Again, I'm not sure why, but they really have been sticklers for the truck drivers, transit operators. You still need to have the 1 year post-secondary program. Low skilled, much easier. High school. That's the requirement. Okay, high school can be anywhere in the world, but if it's outside of Canada, you do need the ECA. Language. Okay, and when I'm talking about language, I don't care about your overall score. It's each and every single language ability is what we're looking at. Okay, and each and every one of those must meet the minimum score. So for the high skilled, it's CLB 6, but there are some exceptions below. For the skilled trades, it's CLB 5. For Ontario graduates, you guys would already have it. They are just saying you don't need to take a test again because you would have taken it anyway for your postgrad work permit. Um, so there's that. But the low skilled, it's a CLB 4. Now, these are just entering the pool. Zia is now going to be talking about the EOI system, which are the points. Um, it's similar to Express Entry in that you get points based on your circumstances, but it's not similar in that that's not the end all and be on how they invite you. Okay, so Zia,
Perfect.
tell us about EOI.
Yeah. So with the EOI system, like Elizabeth said, it's a points-based system. So when we look at the criteria that Ontario is now using, the first one we look at is the job offer itself. So what is the specific tier level that it falls into, right? So we have different points depending on the specific tier level of the job offer. And we have points for the broad occupational category that the knock falls into, right? So we're looking at the overall category of the position. And so what OINP has done here is essentially ranked some of the categories as being providing of more points than others. So right now, when we look at, for example, the health occupations, that's where you're going to see the most points being awarded. With regards to the job offer, we're also seeing points for wage. This was here before as well in their old point system, but the weighting right now for the wages have changed. And so the points are awarded anywhere between, depending on your specific hourly wage, and that caps out at $40 an hour now. For work experience, OINP gives points now for the length of time that you have been with your employer in your specific position that you're using for the OINP program, right? So depending on how long you've been working with your company in the same position, you're now getting points. There's a broad range of points. So in our previous system with OINP, you would get points for having 6 or more months, and that would really be the only tier of points available. Now it's broken up 6 to 12 months, 13 to 24, and greater than 24 months. So a lot more points now are being provided for the length of time that you have worked with your employer in a job offer position. So this is really going to be where we see a lot of points and really a differentiating factor. For those applicants who have been with the employer for less than 6 months, and so, if you're applying as an international, through the international graduate with only the 3 months of work experience with your employer, for example, then there's a separate category or separate weighting of points. And here we're looking specifically at work experience in Ontario rather than just with the employer. There's points for legal status in Canada. So do you hold a work permit, a study permit? There's different points awarded for each of those. And then again, here we're seeing earnings history. So looking at the highest amount of earnings that's been reported on your notice of assessment over the last 5 years. And so there's points being awarded just depending on what your total income is. And again, we're only looking for the highest amount over the last 5 years, but it does need to be on the notice of assessment. So we're not looking at T4s. We're looking only at the notice of assessment for this. In terms of education, just what is your highest level of education? And that can be either education completed in Canada or outside of Canada. However, if it is outside of Canada, you do need to have the educational credential, the ECA, the Educational Credential Assessment, to show what it's equivalent to in Canada. And that equivalency is what OINP is using to award points. There's also points for the number of Canadian credentials, so how many programs you've completed here in Canada. Language, of course, there is points being awarded for language, and like we looked at in terms of minimum criteria, we're only looking for what the lowest score is on that language test. So not your overall, not your highest, not the most frequent score you've received. It's the lowest one that you've received. That's what you're getting. That's what OINP is using then to score you on the point system. And then knowledge of official languages. Have you completed one language test or have you completed both the English and French language tests? Here, though, there is a little bit of a difference. In order to be able to count one of those or either of those tests, you do have to score a minimum CLB 6 on all 4 areas in order for that test to count for the official language. Or, if you're trying to count it for to get points for both official languages, you have to have CLB 6 in all 4 areas on both tests. The last one is your location of job offer. So again, Ontario's looking at where exactly is your job offer located. If it's in Toronto, you're getting no points. If you're inside of the GTA, outside of Toronto, you do get some points. And then they've basically categorized the other regions into different census divisions and different municipalities. And so points are awarded just based on where exactly your job offer is located.
Okay, so how is this all going to work? All right, so here is the canned version of it. New system, it's going to be open soon. Not right now. We can't do anything right now. Um, but when the new system opens, then the employer, they have their own profile already. So if you're an employer, you already have your profile, you don't have to set up a new profile. What you will have to do is submit new job offers for any candidate. They may have been in the pool in the old system, that's all gone now. You'll have to submit a new job offer on your portal. New applicants, you will then submit your own new profile as well into the pool. Okay, so we have to re-enter everybody who was in the pool before. If you qualify for the new system, everything has to be re-entered again. Now, very key to understanding how this is going to work is how the province plans to invite. What we have heard is that similar to the previous invites, the province is really going to be concentrating on occupation and the location. EOI points may play into it, similar to category-based draws for express entry, in that they may have a cutoff for points, right? Depending on how many people they want to invite. But they're really trying to pinpoint the occupations and the location. So in terms of general draws where everybody in the pool has a chance based on the EOI points, likely that's not going to be happening, especially for the low skilled positions. Low skilled especially will be very, very occupation based and likely even location plus occupation based. All right. So um, there's also in this way, they have said that they will be allowing not only the traditional employer-based programs, you apply, you receive your provincial nomination, and then you have to apply the long way with the federal government. You don't have to go through the express entry system, you go through the long way, which can take a year and a half to 2 years. With this new system, they have said that they are going to allow express entry linked programs with this so that if you get nominated, you can go through express entry, you get 600 points for express entry, and you're invited to apply. In that situation, it would be a quicker 6-month processing time, but of course, you would have to qualify under the express entry system. How exactly is that going to work? We're not exactly sure yet. Once it does happen, then we will be sending out another newsletter. Most of you probably received our newsletters, and this is why you're joining us. For those of you who haven't, uh, we put everybody who signed up with this onto our news. If you don't like it, you just say you don't want to join, but this is the only way that we're able to let you know about new developments in immigration law, which, as you know, happens constantly. And we'll let you know as well about this. Also, if you haven't yet checked out our social media, we are always posting new things on social media and new laws and etc. on social media. So that's a great way to keep up to date as well. All right, talking about new programs, there are also three other new OINP programs that will be coming up shortly. We don't know exactly when. We think some of them will start popping up in the fall and beyond. Uh, Again, these programs are in the works. They have not been finalized yet with the rules. So we're just going to tell you a little bit about what we know, but when the new programs come up, we'll do another newsletter and possibly other webinars for you as well. Okay?
Yeah, so the first one is the healthcare priority. This is going to allow it's basically going to be a pathway for certain professionals or people without a job offer, but in healthcare occupations to be able to apply through the OINP system without needing that job offer. Now, it is going to be limited in terms of which occupations will be eligible, and essentially, it's going to be those that have to have a license essentially to be able to work in that profession in Ontario. So I think it's going to be a closed list for in terms of which occupations will be eligible for this healthcare professionals pathway. But it's the benefit here is it doesn't need a job offer.
Mm-hmm. The second one is an exciting entrepreneur program. Essentially, the government will be allowing those who have already set up businesses in Ontario. So if you already have a work permit to do so and you've already set up the business, there may be ways for you to apply for permanent residence as well.
Yeah. And the last one is extraordinary talent. So this is meant to allow those who have achieved high recognition and in their research and their leadership or its athletics, basically one of the areas to qualify to apply directly for that permanent residence through the OINP program.
All right. So we wanted to go over some pieces of, I wouldn't say advice per se to your own situation, but some things to think about when we're talking about strategies for how you should apply for permanent residence as well. Okay. So, first of all, when we're looking at the OINP, previous straws do give us a hint about what the government might consider to be priority occupations. For example, healthcare. We know healthcare is there. We know certain kinds of perhaps trades, might be there. However, it's not that the past predicts the future 100%. The government receives data about occupations that are in need all of the time. And they use that new data to invite new people out as well. So it's an indication, but it's not 100%.
Think it's really important to have your lawyer speak with your employer. One, to make sure that they understand the process, and two, to make sure that they qualify. And I think it is really important to be starting this early, especially, right now where we know now the criteria, we know now the process, we have the point system. So really doing that preliminary work in terms of making sure you're eligible, making sure the employer's eligible to go through, that they know the process, and that they're ready to go so that as soon as the program does open, you're ready to get into the pool. There's no delay because I think it's going to be a big opening once it does open.
Okay, now here's the thing. You can't win the lottery if you don't buy a lottery ticket. So if you are qualified to go into the pool, it might just be worth it to put yourself into the pool. We don't know. Nobody knows who is, even the government doesn't really know who is exactly going to be invited to apply. But you might as well take your chances and put yourself into the pool.
But don't rely on the OINP to be your only option to permanent residence. Like Elizabeth talked about, the draws are going to be location, occupation based. We don't know in advance in terms of which criteria they're going to use for each draw. We don't know when draws are going to happen, what those minimum scores are going to look like. So it's a really unpredictable way. I mean, it's great. You should be a part of it if you're eligible, because, like Elizabeth said, you can't win a lottery without buying that lottery ticket, but don't rely on it in terms of all of it being your only option to permanent residence. I think it's very important to have a very solid immigration plan that's not just looking at what your plan A is, but having a plan B, a plan C, knowing what those steps are to qualify for permanent residence, put yourself in the best position to be able to apply, and really mitigating any potential changes that are there. Having that, I think that robust immigration plan is going to be, it has been and will continue to be important for permanent residents.
100%, 100%. Okay, so this is our information about contacting us for your consultations, your personal consultations. If you have come to this webinar, we do offer you a discounted first consultation of $100. So plus tax, if tax applies. So do let us know if you have come to this webinar. Okay. Now, and also here's our social media handles. Like I said, we post regularly on this on different aspects of law. So feel free to join. All right. So, Zia, let's go through some questions.
Yeah, we've
Um,
gotten some great questions. I'll start with one just in terms of putting into context what OINP is. We've gotten a lot of questions about, is this going to eliminate express entry? Does it replace CEC, skilled worker? How does that all play together?
yes. So please note what we are talking about today is a very specific program. It's the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. It is not express entry. It has an express entry linked pathway, but it certainly does not replace in any means express entry. Express entry, Canadian experience class, federal skilled worker class, that is a different system. So you can apply for both express entry and apply for this as well. In fact, if you're going to express entry pathway, you're going to probably need to have an express entry profile to do this. But what we're talking about when we say it replaced the old program, there were old programs under the OINP that were in place, and this new program replaces those programs, not express entry. Okay, Zia, can a nonprofit company or union apply as an employer? If so, what is the income requirement?
For sure. So, in terms of government positions, OINP has specifically said that the Ontario Public Service, so OPS, or an OPS entity, those applications will not be accepted because OPS isn't currently participating as an employer under the OINP program. Other government employers that are not staffed by OPS employees can still be considered as long as they meet the general employer eligibility criteria. Um, Elizabeth, so can we talk about the work experience requirements? So when we were looking at the exceptions, how do those exceptions work, specifically when we're talking about like, for example, engineer techs.
Hmm. So work experience with engineer techs, they still need that work experience. It's for the 2 out of 5. Well, when we're talking about working with the same employer for the 6 months or the 3 months for Ontario graduates, that is in the same position. You just have to be in the same position for that. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. When it comes to the third option of 2 out of 5 years, for the most part, you have to have 2 years in the last 5 years, full-time position, where it's in the same occupation code, same knock code. There are some exceptions. They're a little bit more flexible, let's say. For example, engineering technologists and technicians. If you were an engineer before, you can be an engineer technologist or technician. If you were a nurse or practical nurse or different kind of nursing sort of designations before, and now you want to have a job offer as a nurse's aide, you can use that experience for this. Same as I want to be a pharmacist assistant. I was a pharmacist before. I can use that. That is
Mhm.
basically what they're talking about. But they have only named these
Yeah.
three professions. No other anything else. You have to have that knock code of the 2 out of 5 years. Otherwise, you just work with your employer for 6 months or 3 months. You can qualify. Okay, so Zia, someone is asking, does the job have to be in person or can it be a remote job?
This is a
Favorite
great
question.
question. This is a
Mhm.
great question. Um, there has to be a physical premise that, like a physical office that you're reporting into that's located in Ontario. That's one of the requirements in terms of the employer requirements. They do have to have been in operation for 3 years, and they also have to have a presence in Ontario. With regards to the specific job, OINP, and Elizabeth, feel free if there's anything else here, but OINP has, I know, accepted in the past hybrid positions. I think fully remote positions may be problematic. This is one area I think we're waiting for further clarification on when it comes to fully remote positions. I think if it's a hybrid role, that's fine.
And also, the employer does have to have an office in
Yeah,
Ontario. If
yeah,
if
they have to
the
have a physical
employer
presence.
has like
Yeah,
zero office, that's an issue.
correct. Yeah.
So, yeah, there has to be a so I mean, I know a lot of IT jobs are pretty much remote. So we do have to look at those things pretty closely. But come and see us and we can certainly talk to you and the employer about this as well.
I think related to this, if does the employer have to be registered in Ontario, or can it be an employer registered in another province but has a physical office and is giving the job in Ontario?
Yeah. Yeah. I think all of those things are things that we have to take a look at when we look at whether what the does it meet the definition of
Mhm.
an Ontario employer as well. Okay, so this person is asking about being employed with the employer uh, from previously. So first question, does the employee have to be employed or still working with the employer at the time of the application review?
Yeah, this is very important. With the workforce priority stream, there's different stages to your application, right? You're going into the pool, you're creating your expression of interest and waiting in the pool, you're receiving an ITA, submitting your OINP application, getting your nomination, applying for permanent residence. Throughout this entire process, so from the time you create your profile up until you get your permanent residence, you have to remain employed in the same position because Ontario is essentially evaluating and approving that particular position with the employer, right? Remember that there are requirements on the position, the employer. that are being met. And so Ontario is approving those specific conditions for your nomination. So from the time you start up until permanent residence is granted, you do have to remain with the employer in the same position.
Okay. And then what about if can an employer be rejected even if they are qualified or qualified?
Well, I mean, I think that's something that we would want to review to see what the reason is for them being refused and take a look to see, is there something that maybe we may have missed when looking at it the first time in terms of their eligibility. Um, or if there's an incorrect decision. Of course, we can certainly review that to see what can be done. What I would suggest in those types of situations is contact us so we can do a proper review of the eligibility and talk to you about what your options are.
Sometimes the employer might think that they qualify, and yet
Yeah.
there is something there that they don't qualify. Certain things like office location and such can be an issue, and the government is doing a lot more compliance reviews. They will even go and visit the employer on site sometimes. They will call the employer oftentimes. So it's not the end when they make a registration or even when they submit, if we submit your application after you receive the invitation to apply. There could be more afterwards.
Hey, I have a job offer from 2023 when I joined my company. Can I still use that?
Yeah, if you have a job offer, certainly. And then when we submit your application, we will want to have confirmations about your job, and we often have letters and etc. From the company about your situation as well. We also want to take a look at your employment agreement to see if it suffices. Otherwise, there might be other documents that we'll need to use to supplement. Okay. So what about university graduates uh, from other places in Canada? Are they accepted as entries?
They can still enter the program. They would just enter under the general criteria. So either needing the 6 months with the employer or having 2 years of experience in the past 5 years in that same knock. They would not meet the definition of the recent Ontario graduate solely because the education wasn't completed in an eligible Ontario institution. So that 3 month requirement wouldn't be applicable, but they could meet either the 6 months or the 2 years of experience. Um, so for other employers that are not in GTA, not in one of the other listed communities, if they have revenue, so the revenue requirement then is the decreased amount of 250,000 for the last 2 fiscal years. If the employer does not meet that criteria, then how do I apply? Can I still apply?
If your employer just does not meet any of the criteria, then no, they won't qualify and you won't apply. So we do have to make sure that the employer, that's why we put it first, does the employer qualify? Otherwise, don't even need to bother the employer to move forward. Um, so we'll need to take a look for you for all sorts of different kinds of OINP is not the end all and be all. There are other uh, programs such as Express Entry, and conditions do change. So we'll just need to take a look at that. Zia, this person is asking whether or not they're going to be focusing on different kinds of occupation codes. And if they have really, really high EOIs, but they're not sure if they're going to be invited to apply because of the occupation, what should they do?
Yeah, that's a tough question because we just don't know which occupations Ontario is going to be prioritizing or going to be doing draws for. I think like Elizabeth said earlier, you can go back and look at what they've selected in the past year, but that doesn't mean that Ontario is going to be limited to that. We may see changes in terms of which occupations they prioritize going forward, which ones they do draws for. I think, again, this comes down to having multiple options, making sure you have that robust immigration plan for you, just based on your own specific circumstances. So here I would recommend, just send us an email, schedule a consultation so we can go through your background specifically and see what options are available to you based on your experience. Elizabeth, this next question is for the OINP. Will a permanent part-time job offer with 16 months of experience work for this program?
It has to meet at least 30 hours a week. So you can use part-time work experience before we can add some of that experience together, but moving forward for your job offer, it has to be at least 30 hours a week. If it's not 30 hours a week, then you're not going to qualify for the program. Zia, this person is asking, high skilled and low skilled tiers, are they going to be ranked together in a draw or are they going to be separated? How does that EOI system work?
Sure. Theoretically, Ontario could do a draw with both, but I don't think that that's what we're going to see. It's going to be based, like Elizabeth said, it's going to be based on occupations. So what I expect Ontario to do is to say that for this draw, here's the list of occupations that are being selected from, and then here's the minimum EOI score for those particular occupations in this particular draw. So it's not going to be a general system. You're not going to see general draws. I think it's going to be very focused. And, every time they do a draw, we'll see the criteria being posted on OINP site on their updates page to say, okay, today's draw was for these 10 occupations, for example, and here was the minimum EOI score. And I think just, when you look at the points system, they would need to do separate draws for high skilled and low skilled positions. Otherwise, it might be difficult. Elizabeth, do overseas wages or I guess income count for any of the points?
I mean, you can have work for free. That's not counted as work. Does it need to meet median wage over here? No, it doesn't. If you had worked at other positions in order to qualify for the 2 out of 5 years, then yeah, we can take a look at those other, but just it cannot have been free. Um, and it should be reasonable. Like you can't receive $1 for a year, right? Like it has to be reasonable. But yeah, no, it doesn't have to meet any sort of median wage calculations over here.
What about for the EOI points? Because I know that there's a category for wage. Can you get points for wages for previous positions outside of Canada?
I don't believe so. I think it's NOAs in Canada. So you can't get an NOA outside of Canada. So it's in the last 5 years in Canada over here. Okay. In terms of if someone has a education outside of Canada, they have a PhD, they have undergrad, they have a master's. Do they have to get all three of them ECAs or just the PhD?
Just your highest level of education. When we look at the point system, it's only considering points for your highest level of completed education. So assuming that the PhD is equivalent, in this example, the PhD is equivalent to a Canadian PhD, that would be all you would need an ECA for. Um, if I live in Toronto, employer issues a job offer. So the employer is located in Waterloo, issues a job offer in Waterloo, but I work in Toronto. The office is in Waterloo. Is this going to be a problem for OINP?
Well, first of all, I think the OINP might be suspicious as to where you're actually going to be working. Why is it all of a sudden you're going to be transferring to Waterloo? But I would say if you're going to be transferring, probably what I would say is it needs to be in the same position. So I would suggest that you work in Waterloo for 6 months or 3 months if you're an Ontario graduate before putting your name into the pool because it should be the same position, the same. They may have different, changes for this in the future. That's something that, we can get further details about, but it should be there. But I would caution you to say, when you're looking at locations, a lot of us have remote work where we can basically say we'll report to any office. Be very cautious about how is it that you are going to be reporting to the Waterloo office and say you're employed by the Waterloo office? Is your supervisor located in Waterloo or is your supervisor located in Toronto? Right? So if you're going to be changing locations, that's something that we would need to consider. Any criteria for age or spouse qualifications?
For Ontario, for this OINP program, no, we don't have any criteria, no points are being awarded for your age or for your spouse's background. So it's just focused on you as the principal applicant, employer in terms of eligibility, but that's about it. For points, we're not looking at age, we're not looking at your spouse's background. Elizabeth, when an applicant asks you for assistance to apply through the OINP program, can you talk about how you help that individual apply?
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing we do is have that initial consultation. You can come and sit down with us, and we will go through whether or not this program is the right one for you. If this program is the right one, what we can do, and if there are other programs as well. Once we figure out if this program is something that you should move forward with, the next step is to talk with your employer to make sure that they're on board. Sometimes you might think that the employer qualifies and they may not. Sometimes the employer may qualify, but they don't really understand what the program is and they don't want to help you. So the first thing to do before you can submit anything is to speak with the employer, make sure that they qualify, they're on board, they're willing to move forward with the system for you. Okay. It's very important that you have someone working with the employer. So we can act as a buffer. The employer may have some sensitive information that they don't want to share with you. Things about their income, things about other people's salaries, etc. Okay, so we can be there to act as the buffer to work with them and make sure that their information, their application is submitted properly. That information is consistent with the application that you are submitting, but we don't need to tell you all of the employer sensitive information. You don't need to know. You don't probably want to know, right? It's not none of your business anyway. You just want to get your application through. So we can act as that firewall. And throughout this application process, it's very important that if you're lucky enough to get invited to apply, you have to make sure everything is perfect. Because if you're missing one little piece of documentation, one little piece of information, one signature, and your application is returned, you will lose that opportunity. Okay. Sometimes as well, there may be additional information that the Ontario government wants to know. Certain applications, especially with their smaller employers, the Ontario government may not be satisfied with just declarations. They may want to have extra evidence about how the employer qualifies for the program. They may have compliance reviews as well. And so it's very important that you have someone experienced to make sure that every step is there. And it's very important that you have someone who understands how this program works, what the criteria is to explain everything to the officer. First, we have our submission letter. Later on, there might be calls, there might be follow-up emails, etc. Afterwards, if there are any updates to your position, maybe you get a salary raise. Maybe you want to be, have different conditions change. That is something that the employer will also need to tell the government in order to meet compliance. So it's a long answer, but it's certainly, there's a lot. that's why you do need to have a qualified lawyer to help you with this. Uh, Zia, LMIA exempt francophone work permit holder. Can they apply through OINP?
Yes, OINP doesn't restrict in terms of what type of work permit you hold. They're not looking at how the work permit or what category it was, as long as it's a work permit that does grant you status in Canada. So you're not applying through the refugee program, then yes, you are able to use that work permit to get points and to go through the OINP program. Elizabeth, a lot of questions we're receiving are about the employers in terms of what did the employer need to do in order to start this process? They have to create a portal somewhere. What does creating a job offer mean?
Okay. So there's certain things about what they have to do, and other part of it is their obligations. What do they have to do? Um, Create a portal, submit the information about the job offer. When you're invited to apply, they submit the form. They have to submit documents, etc. Later on, they may have to submit extra documents if the government wants to make sure that they meet the criteria for qualifications. There, then on the other hand, it's the compliance and it's the obligations. So for almost everyone who goes through OIMP, you're probably already working with the employer, you have a work permit. You don't necessarily need, the employer does not need to do recruitment. They don't have to show they can find a Canadian to do the job. Okay, that's the good part about it. So it's much, much less onerous than a LMIA. However, the employer must comply with the requirement to keep you in that position and keep you with the same sort of duties. They can raise your salary, that's okay, but they can't decrease your salary, they can't decrease your hours. Whatever they state on that form, they have to keep consistent until you get permanent residence or unless you are laid off. Okay, now the employer can fire you. The employer can lay you off, just like any other Canadian. You, however, if you that happens, will be that will be an issue for your application. If you are fired, if you are laid off, then the employer normally would let the Ontario government know, and the Ontario government would let the federal government know, and the federal government would likely take away your application, even if you have received a provincial nomination and you're just waiting for the government to approve your application. So in these kind of cases, the employer does have an advantage in the fact that they can keep you for, a certain amount of time for permanent residence. You also have to be aware that if you don't meet the requirements of the job offer, that at any time before permanent residence is issued, that your application would be rejected at that time.
So just to clarify one thing you said, Liz, what
Mm.
about promotions, right? What if an employer wants to offer you a promotion, but you're going through this OINP
So the
process?
promotion can be problematic if your duties change, if your occupation changes to another knock code. Remember, the occupation is probably one of the most important reasons why you're invited to apply. So let's say I was a personal support worker, a nurse's aide, and then I was promoted to supervisor for nurse's aide. That's a problem. You weren't selected for being a supervisor, you're selected for being a nurse's aide. So until you get your permanent residence, you must stay at the same occupation. You can get a salary bump, especially if everybody else is getting a salary bump. You can get a salary bump like everyone else. But if the salary bump is so much higher, so that it's probably because you got a raise, you got a not a raise, you got a promotion, okay, to another occupation. That could be an issue. Okay. So that's the obligation that the employer has when they sign up for this program. They sign an agreement with the Ontario government to let them know if there are any changes, they are supposed to let the Ontario government know. Okay. I think we are out of time, guys. We have exceeded our time scheduled for this webinar, but thank you so much for joining us today. And all the best with everything. This program is an exciting one. It's brand new. There's still a lot of kinks to iron out, um, but we're here for you. And thank you so much for joining. Let us know if you would like to talk about your own situation. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.